The fourth-floor oncology ward of St. Jude's General hummed with the quiet, desperate machinery of hope. It was a sound composed of a dozen smaller noises: the gentle hiss of oxygen, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished linoleum. It was a place of hushed conversations and carefully managed emotions, where every sound, louder than a whisper, felt like a violation. Into this sterile sanctuary of quiet suffering walked the antithesis of its every principle. He didn't stride or saunter. He moved with a heavy, deliberate tread that announced his presence with each step. The soles of his scuffed leather boots were thick and solid, landing on the floor with a dull thud that seemed to absorb the room's fragile silence. He wore faded, road-worn jeans and a heavy leather jacket, the kind of armor built for highways, not hallways. Across the back, a patched insignia depicted a stylized caduceus, but with the rod replaced by a piston and the snakes coiled around a wrench. It was the emblem of a small, tight-knit riding club, men who found their church on two wheels. Heads turned. A family huddled near the nurse's station looked up, their weary faces tightening with alarm. A young resident, flipping through a chart, paused and watched him pass, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. The man ignored them all. His gaze was fixed on the far end of the corridor, toward room 412. His face, framed by a thick, gray-streaked beard and lines etched by wind and sun, was a mask of placid neutrality. Tattoos crept from the collar of his shirt up his neck, intricate patterns of ink that told stories no one in this building would ever bother to ask about. He was halfway to his destination when a figure stepped directly into his path. Nurse Catherine Miller was, in many ways, the guardian of this ward. She was in her late 40s with a crisp, no-nonsense demeanor that was both a professional asset and a personal shield. She'd worked oncology for 15 years, and her eyes had a practiced ability to scan, assess, and categorize any potential disruption to the delicate ecosystem she managed. In her mind, the man standing before her was a disruption of the highest order. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. Her voice was level, professionally polite, but held an unmistakable undertone of authority. It was the voice she used for lost visitors, confused family members, and anyone who didn't immediately belong. The biker stopped. He was a good foot taller than her and broader, but he didn't loom. He simply occupied his space. "Here to see a patient," he said. His voice was a low gravel, a stark contrast to the ambient beeping of the machines. "Visiting hours ended 20 minutes ago," Nurse Miller stated, crossing her arms. It was a small gesture, but it squared her shoulders and made her seem like more of a barrier. She glanced pointedly at the large clock on the wall behind him. "And this is a restricted access floor. Family only, and only during designated times." The man gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if considering the institutional logic of her statement. "I'm on the list." "Everyone says that, sir," she replied, her patience already fraying. She had 3 patients whose pain meds needed adjusting, a family to console in room 407, and a mountain of charting to complete. She did not have time for this. "I'm going to need you to head back to the elevators. You can try again tomorrow during normal hours." A few other staff members had noticed the confrontation. A nursing assistant lingered by a supply cart, pretending to be busy. The young resident had closed his chart and was watching with open curiosity. The scene was set. The crisp, uniformed professional holding the line against the scruffy, leather-clad outsider. The outcome seemed preordained. The biker didn't move. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the sheer exhaustion in his eyes. It wasn't the weariness of a long ride, It was something deeper, more profound. It was a fatigue she recognized because she saw it in the mirror every morning. But the rest of him, the jacket, the beard, the boots, eclipsed that fleeting moment of connection. All she saw was a problem that needed to be removed. "Sir," she said, her voice hardening, "I'm not going to ask you again. This is a sensitive ward. My patients need their rest. You need to leave. Now." He let out a slow breath, the sound barely audible. He seemed to be weighing his options, a process that took an infuriatingly long time. He knew the look in her eyes. It was a look that saw the leather and the patches and stopped searching. It saw a stereotype, a caricature, a man who fixed engines and drank cheap beer, a man who had no business walking these quiet, sterile halls. He'd encountered that look in fine dining restaurants, in parent-teacher conferences, in boardrooms, and now, here. It never failed to land with the same dull thud as his boots on the floor. It was the sound of a door being shut, a judgment rendered. He could have argued. He could have stated his purpose plainly. But he knew from long experience that words would only escalate the situation. When you look like him, in a place like this, assertion was always interpreted as aggression. Explanation was seen as a lie. The only currency that worked was proof, cold and undeniable. Without a word, he began to move, not toward the elevator, but inward, toward himself. His gloved hand went to the main zipper of his jacket. It was a heavy, industrial thing, and it made a loud grating sound as he pulled it down. The noise made Nurse Miller flinch. She took a half step back, her hand instinctively moving toward the panic button on the wall behind the nurse's station. "There's no need for that," the man said, his voice calm and even. He saw her movement, understood her fear. He stopped his own motion to show he wasn't a threat. "Then please, just leave," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. The resident began to drift closer, ready to intervene. The biker ignored her plea and resumed his task, moving with a practiced slowness. He shrugged the heavy jacket partially off one shoulder, exposing a plain black t-shirt underneath. The jacket was a complex garment, a piece of equipment with a specific purpose. It had armor in the shoulders and elbows and more pockets than a field medic's vest. He patted an outside pocket, then another. Nothing. He reached inside, his large, calloused hand disappearing into the dark interior. Nurse Miller watched, her body tense, each moment stretched into an eternity when she was imagining the worst. A weapon, contraband, something that would turn this quiet Tuesday night into a security incident she'd be writing reports about for weeks. The story was already forming in her mind. The imposing figure, the refusal to cooperate, the escalation. She would be justified. She was protecting her patients. His hand emerged from the inner pocket empty. He frowned, a brief flicker of annoyance crossing his features. He tried another pocket, this one secured by a small zipper near his ribs. He had to work the tab with his thumb and forefinger, a delicate operation for such large hands. The other nurses were now watching openly. The illusion of being busy had been dropped. The corridor was silent, save for the hum of the machines and the tiny, distinct sound of the zipper. He fished inside the small pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, held together by a thick rubber band. He flipped it open. It was stuffed with receipts, a few folded bills, and a dog-eared photo of a smiling woman. He thumbed past the credit cards and a driver's license. Not there. Nurse Miller's patience evaporated. "That's it. I'm calling security." She turned toward the desk. "Wait," the man said. The word was not a plea, but a quiet command. It had a quality to it, a resonance of authority that made her pause, her hand hovering over the phone. His eyes lit with a flicker of memory. He let the wallet fall shut and tucked it back inside his jacket. Then, with a sigh, he reached up to the collar of the jacket itself. Tucked into a tiny, almost invisible flap of leather sealed with Velcro was his objective. He pinched the fabric and pulled. With a soft, tearing sound, the flap opened. He slid 2 fingers inside and extracted a single plastic card attached to a blue lanyard. He held it out to her. The plastic card swung gently at the end of its tether. It was a standard-issue hospital ID badge. Nurse Miller squinted at it, her mind still refusing to connect the dots. She saw a picture of the man, but he was younger, clean-shaven, with shorter hair, and wearing a crisp blue shirt. He looked like a different person entirely, someone who belonged here. And then she read the words printed beneath the photo. Her breath hitched. The air seemed to leave her lungs in a sudden, painful rush. Her eyes darted from the smiling, professional man in the photograph to the weary, bearded biker standing before her. She looked back at the card, reading the text again, certain she had made a mistake. But the letters were clear, printed in the familiar sans serif font of the hospital's administration. Dr. Elias Thorne, Chief of Surgical Oncology. The world tilted on its axis. The solid ground of her professional certainty turned to sand beneath her feet. Dr. Thorne, not just a doctor, but the doctor. The head of the entire department, the man whose name was spoken with a mixture of awe and reverence on this floor. The surgeon who performed 12-hour operations, who pioneered new techniques, who sat with families and delivered devastating news with a compassion that was legendary. The man she had just threatened to have thrown out by security. The silence in the hallway was now a heavy, ringing thing. The resident's jaw had gone slack. The nursing assistant was staring at the ID as if it were a holy relic. Catherine Miller felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck, painting her cheeks a deep, mortified red. Her carefully constructed world of rules and categories had been demolished by a single piece of plastic. Dr. Thorne simply waited, his arms still outstretched, the ID dangling from his fingers. He didn't smirk. He didn't say, "I told you so." His expression was unchanged, his eyes holding the same deep, bone-weary exhaustion she'd noticed before. He was not here to prove a point. He was just a man trying to do his job, to fulfill a promise. Doctor, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. Dr. Thorne, I am so sorry. I had no idea. He finally lowered his hand, tucking the ID back into its hidden pocket with the same deliberate care he'd used to retrieve it. You had no way of knowing, Nurse Miller. The fact that he knew her name sent another jolt through her system. He had been paying attention. He had seen her, even as she had failed to see him. But I shouldn't have assumed. Her professional composure was gone, replaced by a raw, personal humiliation. She had been so sure, so arrogant in her judgment. She had treated one of the hospital's most respected physicians like a common trespasser. Dr. Thorne looked at her, and his gaze was not accusatory. It was understanding. He saw not a petty bureaucrat, but a tired, overworked nurse trying to maintain order in a place defined by chaos and grief. You did exactly the right thing, he said, and his gravelly voice was suddenly gentle. Your job is to protect the people on this ward. You saw a potential threat to their peace and safety, and you acted on it. You were firm, professional, and you did not back down. That's what a good nurse does. He paused, letting the words sink in. He wasn't just excusing her. He was commending her. He was validating the very instinct that had led to her mistake. Don't ever stop doing that, he added, his voice low but firm. Don't let this change how you guard this floor. Just maybe give the next guy a few more seconds to find his ID. A small, sad smile touched the corners of his mouth before vanishing. He zipped his jacket back up, the grating sound now seeming less like a disruption and more like a man putting his armor back on. He gave her a final, brief nod of respect, a gesture that acknowledged her as a colleague, an equal. Then he turned and continued down the hallway toward room 412. The heavy tread of his boots resumed, but the sound was different now. It no longer seemed intrusive. It sounded purposeful, resolute. He pushed open the door to 412 without knocking. Inside, an elderly man, frail and pale against the white sheets, looked up. A genuine, radiant smile spread across his thin face. Eli, the patient said, his voice weak but full of warmth.